could a seemingly ordinary nightclub in the heart of Colorado Springs turn into the scene of one of the most dramatic federal raids in years? The question shook residents awake as flashing lights lit up the streets and helicopters roared above at 3 a.m. What unfolded was not merely a police operation, but a calculated strike by the Drug Enforcement Administration DEA and Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE, joined by over 300 officers from more than 10 agencies. Their target, an underground nightclub operating in plain sight tied to narcotics, human trafficking, and organized crime. Authorities confirmed that 115 individuals were detained in one sweep. The magnitude of the operation stunned even veteran agents. The club had masqueraded as a vibrant nightlife hub, but behind neon lights and pounding music lay a command post for cartel-linked activity. Residents who once dismissed rumors of drug deals and prostitution within its walls were confronted with stark proof that organized crime was no longer lurking in shadows, it was thriving openly. Federal officials revealed that the club had generated more than 170 calls for service in the past year, complaints ranging from violent brawls to suspected trafficking. Yet its operators stayed a step ahead, shifting locations across the city to avoid law enforcement crackdowns. This cat-and-mouse game ended decisively on that early Sunday morning. Agents breached the doors, cut the music, and flooded the venue with overwhelming force. Witnesses described scenes resembling a war zone door smashed open, dozens of partygoers zip-tied, and military-style bags scattered across the floor. The raid, however, wasn't just about crime in Colorado. Analysts point to the broader context. Organized crime in the United States increasingly intersects with transnational cartels exploiting American cities. Recent reports from Reuters and BBC note a surge in cartel activity north of the border, with synthetic drugs like fentanyl now considered the leading cause of overdose deaths. Defense News has further warned that trafficking routes often overlap with potential avenues for hostile state influence. In this case, Colorado Springs, home to multiple U.S. military installations, became both the stage and the warning sign. Experts say the timing of this operation is no accident. As global instability deepens in 2025, from drone warfare in Ukraine to escalating clashes between Israel and Iran, and maritime tensions in the South China Sea, U.S. security services are racing to protect their own domestic front lines. Dr. Michael Shurkin, a former Rand Corporation analyst, argued in an interview with DW that criminal networks thrive when national attention is fixed abroad. If left unchecked, they can destabilize communities and erode trust in institutions at the very moment when resilience is needed most. The spectacle of the raid also carried a deliberate message. By deploying hundreds of officers in a highly publicized strike, federal authorities showcased both deterrence and resolve. It was a signal to criminal networks not even cities anchored by military pride are immune, and no operation is too entrenched to be dismantled. Yet one question lingers: how could such an extensive network flourish for so long in a community defined by discipline and service? Was this merely a failure of local oversight or a symptom of deeper vulnerabilities in America's war against organized crime? The next revelations would shock the public even more as investigators turned their attention to who exactly was inside that nightclub when the raid began. The most unsettling revelation from the Colorado Springs raid was not the sheer number of arrests, but who stood among the detainees. Federal officials confirmed that 17 of the 115 individuals were active duty military personnel. Even more troubling, 8 of them were not simply patrons, they were working security for the club. These men and women trained to defend the nation were allegedly guarding the doors of an establishment steeped in drugs, prostitution, and trafficking. The presence of military personnel sent shockwaves through both law enforcement and the local community. Colorado Springs is home to several major bases, including Fort Carson and Peterson Space Force Base institutions that symbolize service and sacrifice. For families who view the military as the cornerstone of civic pride, the idea that soldiers could be moonlighting for cartel-linked networks felt like a betrayal. Photos from the raid told the story in stark terms: camouflage rucksacks stacked alongside civilian jackets, proof that the lines between lawful service and illicit work had blurred. Investigators immediately shifted focus from shutting down a nightclub to uncovering a deeper scandal. Was this a case of poorly paid service members chasing extra cash, or evidence of deliberate recruitment by organized crime? Experts warn that cartels have a long history of targeting individuals with specialized skills. Jane's Defense Weekly highlighted in a 2025 report that military-trained recruits offer criminal organizations both discipline and tactical expertise, significantly raising the threat level when integrated into transnational networks. The Department of Defense responded swiftly, announcing a parallel investigation. Cooperation with the DEA was confirmed, with federal prosecutors pressing to determine whether higher-ranking officers had knowledge of these side activities. For Washington under President Donald Trump's administration, the optics could not be ignored. A White House spokesperson emphasized that no uniform shields anyone from accountability, framing the case as a test of institutional integrity. This development is not isolated. Western intelligence officials have long feared infiltration of military ranks by external actors. In Ukraine, Russia has been accused of leveraging mercenary networks and recruiting defectors with combat experience to fuel its war machine. In Latin America, cartels have systematically infiltrated police and military units, eroding public trust. The United States now confronts a version of the same challenge at home. If organized crime can turn American soldiers into enforcers for criminal operations, it gains access not only to manpower but potentially to weapons intelligence and tactical training. Dr. Rebecca Grant, a defense analyst frequently cited by Fox News, described the situation as a red flag for national security. She argued that even a handful of compromised service members could provide cartels with dangerous leverage, from understanding law enforcement procedures to securing sensitive equipment. The question is no longer whether criminal organizations are probing America's defenses, it is how far they have already penetrated. Public reaction has been fierce. Families who once celebrated the military as untouchable now ask whether the institution has been adequately safeguarded against corruption. Local veterans groups expressed anger, with one retired officer telling The Guardian that service members should be the shield of this nation, not the hired muscle of criminal gangs. The scandal leaves a heavy strategic shadow. If 17 military personnel could be discovered inside a single nightclub, what does that suggest about other hidden ties across the country? Could more soldiers be working covertly for cartels, lured by money or coerced by threats? And if so, how might that affect America's ability to respond to crises at home and abroad? As investigators dig deeper, the raid has transformed from a law enforcement victory into a national reckoning. At its heart lies a question that resonates far beyond Colorado Springs: when the guardians of security are compromised, who protects the guardians? The Colorado Springs raid also exposed an international dimension that stunned even seasoned investigators. Out of the 115 people detained, federal officials revealed that 105 remain in ICE custody because they could not prove legal status in the United States. The list of nationalities reads like a map of Latin America's most volatile regions: Guatemala, Cuba, El Salvador, Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia, Nicaragua, Chile, and Honduras. Each detainee represented not only a potential immigration violation, but also a possible link in the transnational pipelines fueling organized crime across the hemisphere. This was not a local nightclub scandal. It was a snapshot of how international cartels infiltrate American communities. Colorado Springs, known more for military bases than cartel activity, became the epicenter of a global network operating under flashing lights and loud music. Analysts point out that this is exactly how organized crime sustains itself: by embedding operations inside legitimate-looking businesses and by using migrant flows to mask cartel operatives. Recent reports from Reuters highlight a troubling trend: U.S. border seizures of fentanyl and synthetic drugs, most traced back to Mexico and China, have doubled compared to 2023. The Guardian adds that Venezuelan and Colombian groups are increasingly forming joint ventures, with Mexican cartels diversifying their reach deep into the United States. The fact that detainees in Colorado Springs came from so many nations illustrates the web of cooperation that cartels now command. Beyond narcotics, human trafficking remains a parallel concern. Investigators suspect that the club was a hub for prostitution rings that exploited undocumented migrants. The combination of drug, sex trafficking, and illegal labor made the venue a one-stop profit center for organized crime. Law enforcement officials described it not as a nightclub, but as a command post for illicit activity where networks converged in plain sight. The strategic implications stretch far beyond Colorado. Western security analysts now warn that these networks thrive in moments when U.S. resources are tied up abroad. With Washington focusing on military support to Ukraine, rising tensions between Israel and Iran, and ongoing maritime confrontations with China in the South China Sea, cartels sense opportunities to expand domestically. A senior European Union official quoted by DW warned in 2025, "When the United States diverts attention to great power competition, organized crime fills the void at home. This is not just a policing issue, it is a national security challenge." Equally alarming is the possibility of cartel military crossover. Some detainees were found carrying military-grade equipment, raising suspicions that smuggling routes may also be supplying arms. Jane's Defense Weekly recently documented cases of cartel factions in Mexico using modified drones and heavy weaponry often obtained through corrupt supply channels. If similar pipelines exist inside US cities, the implications are grave. For NATO and Western allies, the raid is also a cautionary tale. European governments battling gang violence and migrant trafficking networks in cities like Berlin, Paris, and Rome see parallels in how international crime undermines internal cohesion. The lesson is clear: domestic resilience is as critical as overseas deterrence. Colorado Springs thus became more than a local scandal. It became a mirror of global criminal flows that disregard borders and exploit vulnerabilities. The question that now looms large is whether the United States, already stretched by international commitments, can muster the resources to confront such expansive threats at home. If 115 arrests in one raid reveal ties across 9 countries, how many more networks remain hidden in other American cities, quietly embedding themselves until the next dramatic strike? The sheer scale and precision of the Colorado Springs operation underscored how far US law enforcement has evolved in its fight against organized crime. This was not an improvised raid. It was the culmination of months of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and interagency coordination. More than 300 officers representing at least 10 agencies converged on the nightclub at 3 a.m., sealing off streets, deploying tactical teams, and executing a strike designed as much for impact as for arrests. Federal officials described the raid as a show of strength. It was meant to deliver not only a law enforcement victory, but also a deterrent message to networks growing bolder by the day. Helicopters circled overhead, vans lined the streets, and armored agents swarmed through the doors. Witnesses recalled chaos, doors broken down, music silenced mid-beat, and dozens of individuals dragged out in handcuffs. To observers, the raid carried the visual weight of a battlefield rather than a policing action. Behind that spectacle was a sophisticated playbook. Intelligence had revealed that the nightclub had already changed locations multiple times in the past year to evade scrutiny. Each time it reappeared, it drew bigger crowds and more complaints, over 170 calls for service in the past 12 months alone. Investigators pieced together patterns of traffic, unusual financial flows, and suspicious activity, building a case that pointed not just to nightlife excess, but to a command center for organized crime. Experts emphasize that such operations are increasingly necessary. According to Defense News, U.S. federal agencies now view cartel-linked crime as a hybrid threat part, criminal part, insurgent. Cartels are not just dealing drugs, they are employing drones, encrypted communications, and paramilitary tactics. This is why law enforcement operations increasingly resemble counterterrorism raids, said retired FBI agent and analyst Brian O'Donnell. You need overwhelming force because these are no longer back alley drug deals. They are complex multinational operations designed to withstand pressure. The timing of the raid also reflects a broader strategic calculation, with US forces and resources committed to supporting Ukraine's drone war against Russia, monitoring Israel-Iran flashpoints, and reinforcing naval operations in the South China Sea. Domestic agencies cannot afford to let criminal organizations undermine stability at home. President Donald Trump's administration has repeatedly emphasized law and order as a central pillar of its security agenda, framing cartel infiltration as both a border issue and a homeland defense priority. International comparisons reinforce the point. In Mexico, authorities have often been outgunned by cartels wielding heavy weapons and armored vehicles. In Europe, counter-gang operations in Rotterdam and Marseille have likewise required joint task forces and military-style raids. Colorado Springs fits into this global pattern, a reminder that criminal organizations adapt as quickly as state actors, and law enforcement must respond in kind. Yet even with its success, the raid raises pressing questions about sustainability. How many more resources can be devoted to single operations requiring hundreds of officers, and what happens when such networks disperse and reconstitute in other cities? For Colorado Springs, the aftermath is telling. Residents awoke to images of buses filled with detainees, soldiers in custody, and a once bustling nightclub shuttered. The sense of relief was mixed with unease because the raid did not eliminate the networks, it only exposed them. As one European expert told The Guardian, every raid is both a victory and a signal of how much remains hidden. What you see is the tip of the iceberg. This leads to a deeper strategic debate. Can the United States rely on reactive strikes, or must it build a more proactive model to counter organized crime at scale? The spectacle in Colorado was impressive, but will deterrence last? Or are cartels already recalibrating for their next move? The revelations from Colorado Springs carry weight far beyond a single nightclub raid. They strike at the core of national security. When 17 active duty service members are discovered inside a cartel-linked venue, the questions are not merely legal but strategic. Could America's armed forces, long regarded as the backbone of national defense, be vulnerable to infiltration by criminal networks? For Western allies and NATO partners, the scandal resonates deeply. Organized crime is no longer confined to smuggling routes or border towns. It has penetrated institutions once thought untouchable. The presence of military-trained personnel inside the Colorado Club suggests that cartels are deliberately targeting individuals with skills that can multiply their operational capacity. These recruits are not ordinary foot soldiers. They bring disciplined tactical knowledge and access to weapons and procedures that criminal groups could exploit. This concern is amplified by the global security landscape of 2025. In Ukraine, drone warfare has demonstrated how non-state actors and irregular units can dramatically influence the battlefield. In the Middle East, Israel's shadow war with Iran has highlighted the danger of covert infiltration and proxy forces. Meanwhile, US-China tensions in the South China Sea have underscored the strategic importance of resilience at home. The United States cannot afford cracks in its domestic armor while engaging adversaries abroad. Dr. Anthony Cordesman of the Center for Strategic and International Studies recently noted that domestic security failures are force multipliers for adversaries. If the US military cannot guarantee integrity within its own ranks, the risk is not only criminal but geopolitical. In other words, every soldier compromised by a cartel potentially weakens America's deterrence posture in an era of rising global conflict. From a NATO perspective, the raid in Colorado Springs provides a cautionary tale. European militaries have faced similar scandals in Germany. Extremist infiltration of military units has sparked national debates. In Italy and Spain, mafia-linked corruption cases have exposed vulnerabilities. These examples highlight a common threat: when organized crime seeps into the ranks of defense institutions, it undermines collective security. The Trump administration has framed the Colorado Springs case as part of its broader push to reassert law and order as a strategic priority. White House officials stressed that the Department of Defense is conducting a parallel investigation, ensuring accountability while preserving institutional credibility. Still, the scandal forces uncomfortable conversations about soldier welfare pay and the pressures that may make troops susceptible to criminal recruitment. Numbers illustrate the stakes. According to U.S. Southern Command, transnational criminal organizations generate an estimated $315 billion annually, rivaling the GDP of entire nations. This scale means cartels can easily outbid modest military salaries, offering quick money for jobs like nightclub security. While most soldiers resist such temptations, the discovery of even a small group working for cartels raises alarms about systemic vulnerabilities. Strategically, the implications extend to readiness. If cartels can compromise even a fraction of the force, they could potentially gain insight into U.S. logistics patrol patterns or even equipment vulnerabilities. This possibility is why military analysts urge not only prosecutions, but systemic reforms, stronger oversight, better financial support for troops, and enhanced counterintelligence measures. The Colorado Springs raid is therefore not just a domestic crime story, it is a national security case study. It challenges the assumption that America's enemies are only abroad and forces recognition that threats can emerge from within, often where they are least expected. Which raises the urgent question: if cartels can infiltrate a nightclub with the help of US soldiers, how long before they aim higher, toward military facilities themselves or sensitive defense operations? The nightclub raid in Colorado Springs was more than an isolated strike. It symbolized the broader war against organized crime that the United States and its allies must wage in the 21st century. With 115 detainees, 17 military members implicated, and cartel-linked networks exposed, this single event revealed the depth of the challenge facing America's institutions. Organized crime today is not confined to back alleys or border smuggling. It is global, networked, and adaptive. Cartels are using international migration routes, exploiting digital platforms for communication, and even experimenting with military technology such as drones. A recent Reuters investigation warned that Mexican cartels are importing drone components from Asia and customizing them for reconnaissance and precision strikes, borrowing tactics seen on the battlefields of Ukraine. The overlap between criminal enterprises and wartime innovation is blurring the line between domestic policing and international security. For the United States, the message is clear. The fight against organized crime is inseparable from national defense. When cartels infiltrate communities, recruit soldiers, and embed within urban centers, they weaken the home front at the very moment Washington is engaged in great power competition abroad. President Donald Trump's administration has framed this struggle as a central plank of national policy, emphasizing both aggressive law enforcement at home and cooperation with allies abroad to sever cartel supply chains. Western experts stress that these threats cannot be fought in isolation. NATO, already stretched by commitments in Eastern Europe, must also support domestic resilience among member states. As Dr. Claudia Major of the German Institute for International and Security Affairs recently argued, organized crime erodes cohesion just as effectively as foreign adversaries. If left unchecked, it undermines trust in governments and weakens collective security. The Colorado Springs raid underscores this point. International cooperation is as critical against cartels as it is against state-based rivals. At the same time, law enforcement faces practical challenges. Each operation of this magnitude consumes hundreds of officers, vast resources, and months of preparation. While raids generate headlines and deliver short-term disruption, criminal networks are adept at regrouping shifting locations and embedding deeper. The long-term solution analysts argue lies in sustained intelligence sharing, financial tracking of illicit money flows, and strengthening of border security without neglecting the domestic interior. The numbers tell a sobering story. Transnational crime generates hundreds of billions of dollars, annually rivals the defense budgets of mid-sized nations, and kills tens of thousands each year through drug overdoses, trafficking, and violence. The Colorado Springs raid peeled back the curtain on how seamlessly these networks operate within American cities. Yet it also demonstrated that with overwhelming force, interagency cooperation, and political resolve, such networks can be disrupted. For citizens, the images remain unforgettable. Soldiers in handcuffs, helicopters circling, and a nightclub shuttered by the weight of federal power. But the lasting lesson is more complex. This raid was not an end, it was a beginning. Every arrest, every investigation, and every prosecution must now uncover the broader web that enabled such a network to thrive in the first place. And so the story leaves a haunting question. If organized crime can operate so boldly in Colorado Springs, how many other American communities are unknowingly standing on the fault lines of a global battle between law and chaos? The Colorado Springs nightclub raid stands as one of the most dramatic federal operations in recent U.S. history. In a single night, 115 people were detained, including 17 active duty military members, 8 of whom served as club security. The revelation shocked a community defined by military pride, exposing how cartel-linked networks had embedded themselves in plain sight. This operation highlighted the international scale of organized crime, with detainees from 9 Latin American countries and ties to global trafficking pipelines. Experts warned that cartels deliberately target military personnel for recruitment, seeking discipline, tactical skills, and potential access to sensitive equipment. The scandal raised profound national security questions. If soldiers can be compromised by criminal organizations, what risks exist for America's broader defense posture? The raid also demonstrated law enforcement's evolving tactics, deploying over 300 officers in a coordinated strike resembling counterinsurgency operations. Yet experts caution that while such raids disrupt, they do not dismantle cartels, which regroup and adapt quickly. Ultimately, the raid is a warning. Organized crime today is transnational, well-funded, and increasingly militarized. Unless addressed through sustained intelligence sharing, border control, and internal resilience, similar networks will continue to thrive across the United States.